Our first step in our critical thinking course will be to practice recognizing and examining propositions. What is a proposition? Well, a proposition is a sentence that can be true or false. It's probably better to say that a proposition is expressed in a sentence that can be true or false. Because as we'll see, a sentence can actually contain or express more than one proposition. And the same proposition can be expressed by different sentences. But we'll keep it simple for now. And we'll just say that a proposition is a sentence that can be true or false. And the truth or falsehood of a proposition we will refer to as its truth value. Not all sentences can have a truth value. For example, can a question be true or false? No, because it's a question. And a question is not a proposition. It would make no sense if I ask you, can a question be true or false, and you were to say false. And you might say a question cannot be true or false, and that would be a proposition. Propositions and truth value. Here are two propositions. The earth is flat and the earth is spherical. Each of these sentences says something about the shape of the earth. And if the shape of the earth really is like the sentence says it is, then the sentence is true. It expresses a fact about the earth. If not, then the sentence is false. It expresses a fiction. A proposition can be true or false precisely because a proposition says something about something. If it can be true if what it says about that thing is actually the fact about that thing, and false if what it says about that thing is not the case. So which of these are propositions? I'll just bring them up here and you can think about each one as they come by. All right, that's all very simple, so we need not dwell on it. This is just to make sure we know what's going on so far. And here are our answers. Yeah, is the earth flat or spherical? Obviously not a proposition, it's a question. The earth is flat is a proposition. Please don't say the earth is flat. That's not a proposition, but what we call an imperative or a command. You're not saying something about anything. You're just telling me, please not to say that. Don't say the earth is flat. You're telling somebody to do something or not to do something. Making a request, if you like. It is obvious that the earth is spherical. Yes, that's a proposition. What makes you so sure? That's a question. Right. Well, the earth is either flat or it's spherical. This is also a proposition. And it certainly is not flat, so it must be spherical. Also a proposition. Please stop this nonsense. This again is a request, not a proposition. Have you had enough already? Again, it's a question. Yes. Is that a proposition? Well, if by yes we mean I have had enough already, then that's a proposition. And given that we've had enough already, let's leave this topic and go on to the next. Subject and predicate terms. This is part of examining a proposition. Because as we said, every proposition can be true or false because it says something about something. If it didn't say something about anything, then there would be nothing in virtue of which it could be true or false. There wouldn't be anything there that could be like, what we are saying about it. The thing that the proposition is saying something about is the subject. We all know this from basic grammar, right? And the predicate is the something, whatever it is that the proposition is saying about the subject. So when we said the earth is flat, the earth is the subject and is flat is the predicate. One subject or predicate term can consist of more than one word. So for example, here's a proposition. All the known planets in the solar system are spherical. So the subject here is all the known planets in the solar system, and spherical is the predicate. The moon does not produce its own light. So the moon here is the subject and does not produce its own light is the predicate. All right, as we said, a sentence can express more than one proposition. And so there really is a difference between a proposition and a sentence. So for example, look at this. The moon does not produce its own light, but it reflects the light produced by the sun. Here we have a sentence that expresses two propositions. The first proposition is that the moon does not produce its own light, the moon being the subject and does not produce its own light being the predicate. And that also expresses this other proposition that it reflects the light produced by the sun, it being the moon, which again is the subject, but with a different predicate this time. The moon does not produce its own light. It reflects the light produced by the sun. So what we've done there, you see, is basically extracted the propositions from the sentence. And the reason that we've done that is because we want to analyze what has to be the case for the sentence to be true. And if the sentence expresses two propositions joined in this way, then both of the propositions have to be true in order for the sentence to be true. So why are we doing this? The reason is because when we are going to critically reflect on something that we're reading or hearing, we need to examine and understand and grasp precisely what is being said. And we need to be able to analyze it in terms of what we might say its logical constituents. Because of the fact that a proposition is has a truth value, right? And for each proposition, there's a distinct and separate question as to whether it's true or not. In order to examine the truth value of a complex sentence with more than one proposition, we need to ask ourselves what has to be the case in order for that sentence to be true. That will be what the sentence is actually saying. In order to examine that precisely, it's useful to break the sentence up into its distinct propositions. And when we go to examining and evaluating and constructing arguments, dealing with single propositions separately is much clearer and easier and really necessary for us to do that effectively. So the exercise for this unit will be really a matter of examining some samples of written material and analyzing it in terms of the propositions it contains. So we're going to ask you to identify and isolate the propositions in the material. So, for example, we have the sentence, living creatures flourish on the earth, and none of the other known planets in our solar system support life as we know it. What are the propositions in this sentence? How many are there? What are they? What is the subject term of the second proposition? These are the questions I'm asking you now about this sentence. What is the second proposition saying something about? I'll give you some time to think about that. All right. So what we've done here is we've separated out the two propositions. Living creatures flourish on the earth, and none of the other known planets in our solar system support life as we know it. So we've separated out the two propositions, and we've isolated the second proposition with brackets here. And we've indicated where the subject term is in the red color. None of the other known planets in our solar system support life as we know it. That's at least the language which expresses the subject there. But we have to ask ourselves, is that in fact the subject? Is the second proposition really talking about none of the other known planets? Well, not really, right? Then what is it talking about? It's actually saying something about all of the unknown planets in our solar system. So if we were to express that in a more clear way, to identify the subject, we would say all of the other known planets in our solar system do not support life as we know it. That doesn't mean that the first way that it was expressed is wrong, because in fact the meaning of that expression, none of the other known planets in our solar system support life as we know it, is exactly that all of the other known planets in our solar system do not support life as we know it. So this means that when we're analyzing the language that we are analyzing, the language which expresses the idea, we want to understand and grasp what it's saying. We need to look past the language and grasp what the language is indicating or expressing, the meaning, right? We need to look for the meaning. And that's what the meaning is. Sometimes the meaning is different from the actual words. Okay. The words and the meaning. That's our topic now. To understand the sentence, you need to know what it is talking about and what it is saying about it. That is the subject and the predicate. So you need to understand the proposition or propositions in the sentence. And to do this, as I said, you need to get behind the words in a sentence to grasp their meaning. An analogy for this might be a telescope. If you think of the telescope as a metaphor for the words that we use to express our ideas, and the words that we hear or read, which express ideas that we seek to understand through those words, then you could think of the meaning as the stars in the sky that an astronomer is looking at through the telescope. So, therefore, we get something like this, right? Just as an astronomer, in order to properly use the telescope, he needs to look through the telescope to see what he wants to see through the telescope, instead of just looking at the telescope. If he were only to look at the telescope, instead of looking through the telescope, he wouldn't be using the telescope correctly. Likewise, if you just look at the words that are said rather than looking through the words, so to speak, toward the meaning which they indicate or signify, you will not understand what the words are conveying. So that was, if we just go back here, a little bit of what happened here and what I wanted to exemplify. The words here, none of the other known planets in our solar system, if taken in themselves, and I were to ask you what the subject is, you might say that the subject of this proposition is none of the other known planets in our solar system. Whereas in fact, the proposition is telling us something about all of the other known planets in our solar system. And we know this because we're looking through the words. We're using the words to ascertain the meaning behind the words rather than simply at the words. And this will be important in some of our exercises, because I'll ask you to tell me what the subject of the sentence is or the subject of the proposition is. And if you were maybe working hastily and a little bit lazily, you might just cut the words up into their pieces and then give me a piece of the sentence, right? And that would not give the right answer, because I'll be looking for the meaning rather than simply the words. Right? So to review that, to understand the sentence, you need to know what it is talking about, the subject, and what it is saying about that subject, which is the predicate. And that means you need to understand the proposition or propositions in it. And really, the proposition, as we said, a sentence expresses a proposition. So we can think of the proposition as the meaning of the sentence. And to grasp that, you need to use the words in the right way and not just play with the words. Okay, this is one of the assignments or part of the exercises that you are given for this chapter. And we'll use this part of it as an example. This passage was translated from some writing by Ali ibn Farhun al-Qutubi, which was reprinted in a magazine called Al-Juma. I came upon this passage many years ago asking students to bring to class samples of writing which contained arguments that can then be analyzed. And I did that in order to collect samples for exercises which the students will have been familiar with and aware of, so that I could find maybe the best examples available to use for the exercises. So we started you out here with the first answer as an example. In this exercise, you're asked to identify the propositions in the passage and number them in order. Then underline the predicate, right? And this is what we've done here. So we can see that the first couple of sentences here are not propositions. Beware of following the footsteps of those who become slaves to their whims and start to cater to all their needs, while totally ignoring what Allah and His Messenger command and forbid. Right, so that's not a proposition because it's an imperative. It's telling somebody to do something. Beware, right? The second sentence says, don't be fooled by the luxury in which they are living now, but be certain that. Okay, now, this is a long sentence. The sentence contains a proposition, but itself is not a proposition, right? It says, don't be fooled by the luxury in which they are living now, right? Now we have an imperative, some kind of command, right? And not something which has a truth value. It's not a proposition, but it contains a proposition, because then it tells you to be certain. Now, it's telling you to be certain is an imperative, but you should be certain of something, and now that which you should be certain of is expressed in a proposition. And of course it should be, because if I ask you or tell you to know something is the case, or to be certain that something is the case, or to believe something is the case, then whatever I'm telling you to be certain of, or to know, or to believe is something which either is or is not the case, and therefore the description of that will be expressed in a proposition, right? And that is here. Ahead of them lies a day on which their feet will shake, their bodies will shiver, and their colors will fade. So what's the subject? The subject is this day, right? The day of judgment, a day on which their feet will shake, their bodies will shiver, and their colors will fade. And what is this proposition saying about it? It's saying that it lies ahead of them, right? Okay, but we see that this proposition also contains within it propositions. Is what about that day? Well, three things. Their feet will shake, their bodies will shiver, and their colors will fade, right? So we have three propositions. The first one there, subject is their feet, and the predicate, what is it saying about their feet? They will shake. The third one, the subject is their bodies. What's it saying about their bodies? That their bodies will shiver. And the third one there is saying that their colors, that's the subject, will fade, right? That's the predicate. So you see what we've done there. We've analyzed that sentence from the beginning. The sentence itself as a whole is not a proposition, but it contains in it a proposition. And then that proposition contains in it three other propositions. Yeah? Okay. So, in fact, now we can ask ourselves, what is the term in the first proposition that contains the other three propositions? Well, it's the subject term, right? The predicate lies ahead of them. What lies ahead of them? That's the subject, this day. Which day? Oh, the day on which their feet will shake, their bodies will shiver, and their colors will fade. So the three propositions are part of the subject term. And it can be the other way. Propositions can be part of the predicate term as well. Okay, what about the next sentence? Is it a proposition or not? I'll give you a minute to think about that. And also to think about how to analyze it. What is the subject of the proposition? What is the predicate of it, if there is one? And whether there are any other propositions contained inside it. There's a cat outside my window. That's right. It's a proposition, and the subject is it, which is the day, right? The predicate is the day when they're standing up will be so long, their reckoning will be tough, and their hearts will be at their throats. And if you see there are more propositions in there, you are also right. Their standing will be so long. That's a proposition. Their standing up is the subject, and will be so long is the predicate. So you see we've underlined the predicate, and we've underlined the predicate in each of these propositions. I think you can see why we did it that way. Okay. What about the next sentence? They will see all their deeds written in their books on a day, the length of which equals 50,000 years. Can it be true or false? Yes, it can. It's telling us about them, they, those people, right? And what about them? They will see all their deeds written in their books on a day, the length of which equals 50,000 years. All right. Are there any more propositions in here? Another one about them. They will suffer the unbearable heat and the unendurable thirst. So you see we've numbered the proposition and we've underlined the predicate in it. And here we've also done that same thing. They will also sob and cry from agony and regret. It's a proposition because it's talking about something. It has a subject, they, and the predicate is they will also sob and cry from agony and regret. And then the last sentence, think about that day. It's not a proposition, right? Again, an imperative saying you should do something. You should think about that day. All right, so the other exercises are similar to this, different passages with different topics, but you're asked to do the same thing. So you've seen how to do it here, and I think it's fairly simple. We know what a proposition is, we know what a subject term is, and what a predicate term is, and we know how to do the exercise. That is, identify each proposition, number it in order, and then underline the predicate. I hope you enjoyed the exercises and that you learned something from it. And if you find it to be very easy and basic, that's good because it really is. But it's something that we just need to get through and clarify and keep in mind for the more interesting things, inshallah, that will be coming up in later units of the course.